Listening Skills Assessment, presented by Liz Barclay, TVI and author of the book Learning to Listen, Listening to Learn.
Hello, my name's Liz Barclay, and I'm going to be talking with you today about listening skills assessment for students in elementary, middle, and high school. And as we get started, I'd like to invite you for just a moment to close your eyes and listen. So, as you can see on this first slide, these young girls are listening to probably what you were listening to. And when you had your eyes closed and you listened, you had so many visual images that you could use to attach meaning to all of the sounds that you heard. For instance, you heard the water as it rushed in and rushed out. You heard the sounds of the various birds and the wind as it whipped around. You probably heard more than one set of waves as the waves came towards you and receded. And all of these images, these visual images, you imagined in your mind because of what you heard and what you have seen in the past, your bank, your foundation of visual images and memories that you use when you make meaning to the sounds that you hear. Now take a close look at these two little girls. The two little girls that are looking towards the water are blind. They have no vision. They're standing at the edge of the water. And these are two little girls who don't get out to the beach very often. And so on this particular day, it was a very exciting experience for them to stand on the edge of the water like that and to take in all of the sounds that you just heard and to feel the cold water as it came up on their toes. But they were gaining a lot of information from what people have told them about the ocean that they were about to experience and what they were now experiencing, experiential learning. And they really took a lot from that experience that they could now use anytime they thought of going to the ocean, when they read about in a book children who played at the seaside, when things happened in stories, things happen in stories that take place at the ocean, they now have this experience, this feeling, these sounds that they have combined to make meaning with what they've heard. So I'd like you to, again, maybe close your eyes for a moment and think of these words from Steve Kusisto, who's a great writer in our field of visual impairment and blindness. He writes from his own perspective as a person without vision. And he said, "I have been lucky sometimes to find places where I can work by ear and pause for whole moments, receiving treasures of sound and sense." And I think that those very beautiful words encapsulate some of the thoughts, some of the ideas that I'd like to share with you today. And that's a quote from his book, A Memoir of Blindness and Listening. So skillful listening supports concept development, and good concept development definitely supports curricular access and social access. And so, again, another example of concept development occurring right before your eyes. This little girl who has no vision is holding a baby chick in her hands. This was a field trip that was taken to a farm, a rescue farm. And all around the children were farm animals, chickens and baby chicks and rabbits and several other types of animals as well. And here she is getting firsthand experience to understand what a baby chick feels like. And there's nothing like holding a baby chick. If any of you have done it, they quiver as you hold them, and the soft fluff kind of blows around your fingers as you have to hold them very, very gently. And you can just see the intent concentration on her face as she takes in this sensory information, that she's getting this firsthand knowledge that's really giving her great concept development. Again, experiential learning. So when we talk about assessment, we're really starting at that very basic level of what do we assess? We must consider things such as, is the student utilizing listening skills skillfully? And if not, what can the TVI, do to facilitate this type of skill development? What do we as TVIs need to pay attention to in terms of the student's listening skill development, and what areas should be focused on? And it all begins with that area of concept development, because when we're working with young children at the school age level, that's where we start. And of course, everything that we do, we tie to we think about that great structure of the expanded core curriculum, the ECC. And when we look at all of these areas of the ECC, compensatory skills, independent living skills, orientation and mobility skills, recreation and leisure, self-determination, sensory efficiency, social interaction, use of assistive technology, and career education, listening skills are integral to every single aspect. We, of course, they fall under the umbrella of compensatory access skills, including communication modes, and they do. But in every single area of the ECC, listening skills are also essential. Typically, listening skills are assessed through observation and by using checklists. That's an informal way to assess listening skills. But when we do this, it's quite essential that we pay special attention to ensure that students understand what they're listening to during instruction, and when listening to recorded materials throughout the curriculum-based assessment. When students have multiple disabilities or learning disabilities are suspected, formal assessment tools will be probably used by school psychologists and speech language pathologists. But the work that we do, that in the classroom, through observation, through our teaching with students using diagnostic teaching, and checklists and curriculum-based assessment, these are the more informal modes of assessment that we're employing. So we're going to begin, of course, at the elementary school level. And these are the areas that we'll talk about a little bit in each section as we go here. We'll begin with listening and concept development. So This next photograph is a picture of Mr. Wayne Siligo, who is a music instructor at California School for the Blind. And the student who's standing before him, named Diego, is touching a bag that's attached to bagpipes that Mr. Siligo is playing. And you can see Mr. Siligo is blowing air into the bagpipe, and Diego he has his hand on that bag. This is the first time he's ever experienced bagpipes, and he's feeling the bag as it expands as Mr. Siligo blows into the bag. So again, hands-on experience, concept development. So when that area of concept development, when we're thinking about listening, we're wondering, does the student have sufficient conceptual understanding to comprehend the concepts presented in the curriculum and when literature is being read aloud? This is what, as a teacher of the visually impaired, you should be thinking about when you think of, okay, what is our job as a TVI with regard to listening skills development? We really need to be asking that question. And if we wonder if the student is really comprehending what they're hearing, the information that they're getting, we need to design programs that give our students that hands-on experiential learning that will support their concept development. And this is one of the most basic ideas that you learn as a TVI, and it applies very much to the development of listening skills. So let's think about some of the listening skills that have to be employed and the understanding of concepts when children listen to stories that are read aloud to them. This starts happening in preschool and kindergarten. Every day, children are read to from children's literature that is very, very important to them. At home, of course, parents usually are reading to their children, and the books that they read are just chock full of concepts that some of them are very easy to explain and very easy to experience, and then others are not. On the picture here is the cover of a book called The Littles. There's a whole series about the Littles. And this is a very typical book that's read in elementary school aloud to children. And just think of a child who does not have vision, or a child who has very, very low vision, who maybe may misconstrue some of the things that they see in the pictures because of their lack of detailed vision. And so thinking about what is your job as a teacher of the visually impaired with regard to books like The Littles. There's a lot of concept development that has to take place. And every day, children sit in a circle in school and listen to books that are read aloud. So what do we want to pay attention to? These are some of the assessment strategies. When we're in the classroom observing our student, we need to be paying attention to the concepts being read about and check for our students' comprehension. So that might mean reading aloud to a child separately in addition to what they are getting in the classroom, so that you can stop and think about some of the concepts that are being read about. A very, very basic example of that would be if during Halloween, the classroom is reading many, many stories about pumpkins and the seeds in pumpkins and how pumpkins grow. It's very important that our students have a hands-on experience of a pumpkin, and not just the outside of a pumpkin, not a plastic pumpkin, but a real pumpkin inside and out. This is some of the most basic information that you get at the beginning of the program, but this is very important for the development of listening skills. It's one way to make sure that our students are are being introduced to many of the concepts in literature is to keep a concept log, paying attention to the new concepts being introduced in books so that you can go back and talk more about some of these concepts. Maybe they're positional concepts, maybe they're object concepts, maybe they're concepts about feelings, but that hands-on experiences can be provided when it's possible and when it's necessary. And that, you know, more information can be provided to our student who might not have the concept development that is necessary for true understanding. We'll talk a little bit about general listening and literacy skills. Certainly the concepts are the foundation, but as children begin to learn how to read and write, they have to have good phonemic and phonological skills. And as you remember from your literacy course, the phonemic awareness and phonological skills are the auditory perceptual skills that are listening skills. And listening comprehension to classroom information has to do with the level of concept, vocabulary, confirmation, and comprehension that we just discussed. But our students also have to have those auditory perceptual skills that are phonemic and phonological skills. So both of these areas are important. In the book, Learning to Listen and Listening to Learn, there are checklists that cover these areas, the areas of concept development, and also the listening and literacy skills that have to do with phonemic and phonological skills. So this is just an example of what you'll find in that book in terms of a checklist that can be used to keep track of these things. If our students are moving along very easily in this area and really gaining through learning to read and write the phonological and phonemic skills, then this is fine, and assessment can be taking place in the classroom with other students. But if there's any question about it, if our students are slow to develop these skills, there are checklists that can be used to make sure that our students are gaining the skills that are necessary, the listening skills that they need in order to learn how to read. And as you can see, it starts out very simply: discriminate and identify verbal and nonverbal sounds. That's all throughout the elementary school level. You'll see that at each level, at each skill, there's a grade level at which the student should be attaining these skills, and the source of where the skill was taken. The first skill, discriminate and identify verbal and nonverbal sounds, that was from a book by Harley, and you'll find the sources within the book as well. The California standards, California is right on the right-hand side there, demonstrate understanding of spoken words, syllables, and sounds, or phonemes, the sounds that they are able to discriminate. And that also from the California state standards. So you can use these checklists to create your own checklists that you might use in order to document information about your students. Curriculum-based assessment is certainly another way during elementary school years to assess our students' skill levels in concept development, as well as phonemic and phonological skills. And it involves using the student performa data on academics in academic subjects. So it can be anything that the student is using already in the classroom with their classmates, or it can be something more formal that you have found that you're also using for the development of their literacy skills. And I'll show you an example of that in just a little bit. Commercially produced curriculum-based measures have standardized procedures. So it's good to be able to differentiate, okay, what is formal and what is not formal. An example of an informal assessment tool might be just simply reading a story to a student and asking questions about who, what, and where, those questions that you would normally ask a student to summarize what's going on in the book. That would be an example of an informal assessment or diagnostic teaching. And using a reading inventory that is read aloud, such as the basic reading inventory, and that is grade level, that is a more formal type of assessment that can be used. Let's take a look at some of the issues with phonemic and phonological skills and some of the strategies. If a student is demonstrating difficulties and delays in learning sound-symbol relationships as they're learning to read, this is an issue. Maintaining running records as the children read aloud to keep track of miscues for analysis is very, very important and is very helpful in discerning this. You can see a pattern start to develop as you keep those running records as they read. It might be important to include a reading specialist or a speech language pathologist to assess for auditory perceptual skills if the student is having difficulties in this area. So it's, again, a team approach. Another area that we assess and keep tabs on is listening comprehension of information that's read aloud or presented in the classroom. We have our concept development, we have our phonemic and phonological awareness, and we need to really be also paying attention to anytime the student is getting information in the classroom in a group situation, or when information is being read aloud to the student, is there enough comprehension going on there? I'd like to show you a chart that I have always found very informative and very important. And this was in the oldie but goodie Foundations of Braille Literacy. And what they have is in the center is the two core areas that all of these other curricular areas are surrounding, and that's the whole area of language and communication. We have both receptive communication and we have expressive communication. So what we take in and understand and what we're able to express and show our understanding. And around that, we have the areas of listening and speaking, which are the oral, listening to, and oral, speaking language. And on the right-hand side, reading, which would be both visual and tactual reading and writing. And I think it's very informative about how all of these areas are linked and connected. We have to have good listening and speaking skills in order to be good readers and good writers. We have to understand and have good receptive understanding in order to both listen and read. And we have to be able to take that information and express it in order to both speak and write. So it's all very connected. When we think of other ways to be assessing more formally our students' listening skills, we are using the learning media assessment. The learning media assessment is something that you probably already know about, and listening skills is a very important part of that learning media assessment. Again, the question we're asking with regard to literacy skills is the student's listening comprehension level in comparison to the reading comprehension level. That's your key question. Is listening being developed as a literacy tool? That's another very important question that should be asked. And again, we have our same modes of assessment. We want to be observing in the classroom and watching our students as they engage in every type of activity. And we really can be using a variety of things, note-taking, checklists, curriculum-based assessment. These are the modes, and this is what we're doing. We're using periodic classroom observation especially during circle time for younger students, and for older students during classroom instruction. During individual instruction, when we're working one-on-one with students, we want to be constantly checking for comprehension of key concepts that are being presented. So often our children who do not have any vision, they may be very, very good at speaking and parroting back things that they have heard. And yet at times, if you dig a little deeper for true comprehension, they are, as I said, parroting or repeating back what they have heard without true understanding. So if you ask them what something means and what they are saying, they have a hard time giving you that information. So that's when we need to go in and really teach that concept and give children examples and bring in things that they can experience if it's possible. Does the student select the main idea of a story, summarize, and relate one idea to another to make inferences? This is what is expected of our students in terms of understanding of both information that is read aloud to them or taught to them, or information that they themselves are reading. They need to be able to pick out the main idea. They need to summarize. They need to relate the ideas to each other. So often you'll ask a student what a book was about, and they perhaps will tell you the whole story from start to finish. And that's not what you wanted. You wanted just what is the most important thing? What is the part that you like the best? And so really practicing with our students, what is the most important thing that just happened? What is the most important thing that just happened in this paragraph? How did this make you feel? What was important to you? So that they start to really take responsibility for reacting to what they've heard or what they've read. So in the classroom, during classroom instruction, we want our students to have these skills. We want them to be able to ask and answer questions during classroom instruction. And sometimes during our observation process, we see that this isn't happening. And so this is a big key about what we need to be working on with our students. Does our student retell stories, and can they name the characters, and can they talk about the setting and the plot? And can the student act on and apply information being presented orally? These are all part of state standards, and these are the things that we need to be aware of with our own students and what they're learning in the classroom. And here's another example of the checklist that you'll find in the book, Learning to Listen. So again, it gives you a list of all of the aspects of listening comprehension of information that's orally presented or read in the classroom. So we're talking about things that maybe someone is reading aloud. We're talking about concepts that are being taught in the classroom. Or it might be also information that they're learning or listening to during a digital recording, or something that they're listening to as a class individually on the computer, because more and more this is what they're doing. As part of the learning media assessment, we oftentimes administer a, a reading assessment, an informal reading inventory as part of the whole learning media assessment. That's the curriculum-based assessment that we oftentimes use. It might be another reading inventory, but this is an example of the BRI, or which is an informal reading inventory, and it's standardized in terms of grade levels and procedures, but it can be adapted for students who require Braille or large print, and then we use this and interpret it very carefully to assess literacy skills, but we can also use this very same tool to assess listening comprehension. The basic reading inventory has alternate reading passages at every grade level. And so some of those reading passages we can use as the reading inventory, and we can use the alternate passages as the listening assessment and the listening comprehension portion of the assessment. It's really important to be able to see how a student's listening comprehension lines up with their reading comprehension. It's very typical for students to have a listening comprehension level that is 1 or 2 grades higher than their reading comprehension level, especially with our students who are visually impaired. So this is okay. Of course, we want the reading comprehension level to be at grade level, but ideally we want that listening comprehension level to be at least at grade level, and we really like it if it's 1 or 2 levels higher, because listening, we want those comprehension, those concepts, the concept development to be really strong for the reading comprehension to take place. So the comprehension questions in any good reading inventory should cover these things. They should be fact-based, but they should also be inference. Some of the questions need to have to do with inference. And we need to make sure that there's plenty of vocabulary and summarization also in those questions. And so let's take a look at some of the questions. Let's go back for just a minute. We'll look at the hungry bear. The hungry bear is a story about busy bees making honey all day. The night was cool and damp. I had slept well until I heard a loud noise near my window. It sounded as if someone were trying to break into my cabin. As I moved from my cot, I could see something black standing near the window. In fright, I knocked on the window. Very slowly and quietly, the great shadow moved back and went away. The next day, we found huge bear tracks. The bear had come for the honeybees, and they were making, the bear had come for the honey that the bees were making in the attic of the cabin. So, let's, oops. Okay, so we start out, and with the BRI, it's very easy to tell what type of question you're asking if you don't, know right off the bat, because the little letters on the side of beside the number tell you, is it a fact question? Is it a title question? Is it an inference question, etc. So the very first one has to do with the title itself. What is the story about? And you can see they give you the answers that are the possible answers that the student can use. The fact question, number 2, what had the bees been doing? They'd been making honey. That was a fact in the story. Let's go down to number 8, inference. What do you think the bear, why do you think the bear walked away? So there we have to give the student the opportunity to think about what they read about and give their response of their opinion. They have to infer, and so on. So this type of assessment, it really covers many bases in terms of comprehension. So it's another way, in addition to our curriculum-based assessment, our observation, another type of assessment tool. And we really need to remember, in order to fully assess children, we need to be using multiple types of assessment modes. And this is part of that group of assessment modes that can be very, very helpful, especially as part of the learning media assessment. Another type of listening that we need to be really paying attention to with our students is active listening. And active listening is the actual act of participating in the classroom when information is being taught. So it takes place in either large or small group instruction. The students might be seated at a desk. They might be seated on the floor during circle time. They might be in actual activity centers, or they might be in the auditorium during an all-school presentation. And it might be just during one-on-one instruction with you, where the student is responsible for actively listening to what is being taught. So it involves the thinking and the feeling and the responding that takes place during listening. And it includes recognizing and comprehending and correctly interpreting the messages that are received. So it's truly understanding and showing that they understand what is being communicated to them. And it really requires participation on their part, not just sitting down or shutting out, but participating and showing attention and energy. Active listening is critical because it's the entryway to understanding a foundation for academic success. So it's something that is very important to the learning process as they progress throughout school, that they start to become a full participant as they're listening. And here again is an example of the checklist that can be found at different grade levels with regard to active listening in the classroom. And one example is participate in collaborative conversations with diverse partners about class topics and texts with peers and adults in small and larger groups. And that starts happening from kindergarten through second grade. And again, this is a state standard that is there for all students to acquire this skill, but we really need to pay attention to it for our students with visual impairments. So it starts, this active listening starts very simply with skills such as identifying and responding to verbal sounds and voices in the environment. And when children are very, very young, this sounds very basic, but is the student who we're working with, are they paying attention to the different information that comes through verbal sounds and voices? Do they turn towards sound and demonstrate the listener-speaker responsibility and focus on the person speaking? Or is this a skill that we need to work with them on? Can they participate in collaborative conversations with other children? And can our student express his or her ideas clearly? These are just examples of some of the skills that we need to be aware of for our students as they listen in the classroom. And then another area that we should think about for our elementary age students, and especially the older elementary age students, is the area of critical listening. When we talk about critical listening, Is our student able to interpret what has been heard and evaluate the information and then respond to it? You can see the stakes are getting a little bit higher here. Is our student really interpreting accurately what's happening in the classroom during instruction? And again, it goes back to that concept development piece. Does our student have adequate concept development to be able to interpret what they've heard in the classroom? So evaluation combines the ability to make meaning of what has been heard and to hold that information in memory in order to construct both literal and inferential meaning. Again, this has to do with listening, asking questions for clarification, being able to raise their hand during classroom instruction, and participate in the goings on of the classroom. Again, it sounds basic, but we have to really make sure that our students are doing it. And then here's an example again from the book. So there are many, many different aspects of this that have to do with asking and answering questions, being able to determine the purpose for listening, to obtain information or solve problems or for enjoyment. Do they know why they're listening? Can they paraphrase information? Can they connect and relate prior experiences, insights, and ideas to those of the speaker? And this is where the experiential learning becomes very, very important. If a child has had a very rich experience at home with their parents and they've been read to and they've been exposed to many experiences, they're much more likely to be able to connect those experiences to what other people are talking about and participate in conversations and participate during instruction. This is a place where you can practice with your students if you're finding out that they're not doing it. You can be observing them in the classroom, bringing them back to instruction with you, talking about those experiences that have been discussed in the classroom, and then what you know from your experience with your student, you can draw parallels and make connections with them and support their critical listening. Another skill is asking thoughtful questions and responding to the relevant questions with appropriate elaboration. Occasionally, our students they aren't able to read the cues from other people, and so knowing how to answer a question with appropriate elaboration is a task that needs to be deliberately taught and practiced. Again, a place where you as a TVI can observe and then come back to that one-to-one instruction and practice. And then summarizing major ideas and supporting evidence presented in spoken messages and formal presentations. Again, this is a standard skill, but the summarization piece is really important for both learning, for learning how to take notes eventually in the classroom as people are speaking loud, and then for their writing skills when they start to develop more and more written comprehension and written expressive writing. They need to be able to summarize major ideas. It also goes back to relevant questions and appropriate elaboration. These are skills that we can work on with our students as we work within their curriculum and become aware of some of the things that may be issues for them. Okay, I'm going to shift just for a minute to listening and technology. And certainly technology is an area where listening is absolutely important. It's a skill that is necessary for the use of technology, and we need great listening skills in order to do that. And we teach our students to use listening a great deal of the time as they are using technology. So we've been talking about children in elementary school and their listening skills generally in terms of concept development, active listening, critical listening, and the listening skills that are the foundations for reading and literacy skills. But when we think about listening and technology, they're very integral. You need great listening skills in order to use technology, and we teach our students to use technology in order to access listening. And so here we have a picture of Eric, a little boy, who is using listening and literacy at the same time. He's got his Braille note-taking device and he's got his earphones on. He's listening to what he's writing. And this is a very important and powerful tool for him. He's not a great reader, but being able to listen to what he's writing is very, very important, because now he can write and hear what he's writing, and he can hear the possible mistakes that he's making, and he can go back and edit what he's written because of that listening piece. He can download a book on that Braille note-taking device and listen to his book. There are just so many things that can happen with listening in tandem to his other literacy skills. And so it's pretty easy to see how important that connection between listening skill development and technology really is. Oops. Well, oops, there we go. I figured it out. Okay, that's an edit. So, okay. So we have here a chart that shows many of the listening skills that have to do with technology that our students will learn, hopefully will work on, and the grade levels that they have, that they should be working on these skills. For instance, listening to audio materials such as talking books, but also listening to the internet, listening to the radio, listening to TV. That starts happening at the preschool level. Our students can begin to learn to listen to recorded books at a very early age for fun and recreational listening, just as they're listening to their parents and their teachers read aloud to them. At these same ages, they should also be learning how to listen to talking books or recorded books for recreational purposes. And that's to help them learn to develop and hone in on that listening skill so that it's not foreign to them, that they can eventually use it in their curriculum to help them provide another means of access, curricular access. And so by starting at this very early age and working with children to listen and tune into literature while they're listening to it with critical listening skills is very, very important. The next one on the list, we'll go through a couple of them, listens to curriculum on an interactive audio tactile learning system. And this is such as a Braille note-taking device. And this can happen on a Mountbatten Brailler if that's still being used beginning in pre-kindergarten, as long as it's helpful. And listening will play a very important role in this literacy skill development because you're using speech-assisted learning devices. Think of the SAL, for instance. That's another device that is a Braille teaching device, a Braille tutoring device, and listening being able to listen to the feedback and then go in and make choices is very, very important. So there are just many different ways that we can think of that our students are using technology and with their listening skills together in order to progress. So here's one more: listens to labels on tactile maps, diagrams, and drawings in courseware, beginning in kindergarten again and continuing through elementary school. Some students are able to use their tactile exploration skills and on a map with a talking label. So there are many, many different ways. Okay, this next slide shows the case study about a young student, and you'll be doing an activity with this case study in your class. And with that, we'll go right into middle and high school. So the things that we're going to be talking about at these levels, middle school and high school, we'll talk a little bit about listening in the classroom. Again, we'll spend some time talking about the technology and listening, and also listening in social situations. And here we have a young lady who shows, this is an old photograph when you see the different types of learning or listening devices that she's using here. But she's using a variety of technology tools with her laptop. And this is a young lady with multiple disabilities who is in a mainstream program. And listening provided her, through technology, her greatest access. She was not a Braille reader. She read some print, but listening was really the foundation of her learning. And she used all of these tools very, very skillfully. Took her a very long way. Oops. Okay, so when we think about a middle school or high school classroom, we really have to think about, okay, how do we assess in that environment? What are the things that we need to assess? We need to be paying attention to. We're not in the classroom with our middle school or high school students as easily as we are in the elementary school years. But observation is really, really important from time to time so that we can really see, are our students able to transition quickly between a variety of classroom activities? Are they able to listen and respond during lectures in small groups and when working with partners? These are the things that we need to be looking at. We also need to be looking at their critical listening skills. Can they quickly access information that was presented? And can they compile that information from a variety of sources such as the internet, digital books, notes, and interviews for research papers, and note-taking skills? This is the time that they really need to be honing their note-taking skills. And so we're looking at both active and critical listening skills as we observe and as we review assignments with them. And of course, there are checklists in the book that help you see what California standards they are. And also there are checklists that can be used that are blank that you can use. You can also create your own checklist by looking at these skills and picking the ones that apply most to your students. Let's take a look for a minute at now the evolution of listening skills from elementary school through high school. And you'll see that if we think about it, there is quite a change, quite a jump of skill level as we go from elementary to middle to high school. When we talk about organizing information in elementary school, the teacher sends home announcements of upcoming projects and tests. And now this is done in a variety of ways, most often digitally. Teachers or elementary school teachers are communicating with family members in addition to things that come through in hard copy. At the middle school level, the teacher requires the students to maintain an organizer with upcoming projects and tests. And this is a real middle school skill that they try to hone with the students. And so that they're teaching the students to take responsibility of these assignments. And then in high school, the teacher announces upcoming projects and tests and expects the students to remember or record the information independently on whatever device that they're using. So you can see at each level, there's a different expectation in terms of listening, taking in that information and working with it and doing what is expected. In technology, in elementary school, the teacher presents the student with digital recordings and closely monitors the usage. And we're talking about recordings that our students are using, our students with visual impairment. In middle school, the teacher provides digital recordings and assigns tasks for the students to complete using the technology. So first you're learning how to use the technology, then you're teaching how to actually complete assignments using the technology in middle school. And then at high school, the teacher presents assignments and expects the student to use appropriate technology to complete the assignment. So again, greater and greater independence. Let's take a look at note-taking. In elementary school, children learn to take notes while information is dictated. And this is a very basic skill that is that children start to learn in later elementary school years. By the time they hit middle school, they're given templates with main ideas, and they're expected to fill in the supporting details to teach these note-taking skills. And then in high school, students are expected to take and organize their own notes. Think of the level of sophistication in terms of listening skills a student has to have in order to take and organize their own notes. And this is a key skill that students have to achieve in order to be able to go on successfully in college. And then socially, it's the same type of thing. In elementary school, students with visual impairments are taught to participate in conversations with peers by responding to what is already being discussed. And that's a big one for our students with visual impairment. Sometimes this is an area where we really have to work one-on-one to set things up and practice conversation skills and turn-taking skills during conversation, which requires a lot of listening and the ability to actually take turns in conversation. In middle school, students with visual impairments are taught how to find peers and initiate two-way conversation. Now we expect them to go out there in the cafeteria or out on the play area and find their friends. And at the high school level, we expect students to be able to find and initiate conversations with increasing independence. And if you've ever been on a very busy high school campus, that is quite a trick. And so we really need to help our students brainstorm some of the ways that they can do this successfully. So how do we determine success? And, we've talked about observation. And again, it's more and more challenging once students are changing classes to be following them around throughout their day to observe all of these things, although observation is our first route of entry into this to really see how things are actually going. So here's um, a little chart for diagnostic teaching and spot checking. And it's a little checklist that could be set up very easily. It's just an example of an easy checklist that you could use to document your student's success during a classroom observation. So how is the student setting up independently their things on their desk, and are they able to come into the classroom, sit down, get things out, get everything ready to actively participate, put up any technology that's needed, have their assignments out, maybe check in with a friend. Are they participating in that setup at the very beginning independently? And do they follow through with any expectations of the teacher at that level? Are they actively taking notes once note-taking starts? Are they able to contribute to the class conversation? Are they referring back to their notes throughout the class for evidence? Do they, when their new note-taking process, when they're taking notes, are they using keywords and phrases in their note-taking? And do they go back then and review and edit their notes? So this is a little template that you could use with a student if you had a goal for more active participation with regard to listening in the classroom. You could use a template like this. You could make one that just has the aspects that are most important to your student, but it can be very, very simple. And these kinds of things, this type of documentation can really help you when you come back in to plan your lesson to address some of the issues with listening. Let's talk a little bit about listening at this level. We certainly take some big jumps in middle school and high school when we talk about using listening and technology. And the photo that we have here is a young man who is using OCR software. He's using a screen reader in tandem with what he's reading on the screen, and he has his, it looks like he's using some dictation as well. He's got a microphone there along with his headset. And at this age, we want our students to be able to use a variety of technology tools with success. We want them to be able to switch back and forth between what is printed or what is brailled and what they are listening to, and to be using everything together. And so we hope that they are using technology skills during classroom instruction, during lecture, while working in groups, during multimedia presentations. We want them to be able to listen to recorded curricular materials using a variety of digital sources, Bookshare, Voice Stream Reader in tandem with Bookshare. There are so many different ways that they can access those materials. We want them to be able to use their listening or the auditory access with print or with Braille, and during computerized testing. So these are sophisticated skills that have built throughout elementary school and continued through middle and high school. And active listening happens throughout the day in a whole variety of contexts, but these technology skills with listening are happening in tandem. So let's talk a bit about listening in social situations. And these are some of the questions that we will be asking ourselves about our students when we think about listening in social situations, especially in middle and high school. Does the student utilize effective listening strategies to engage in social interaction? And this is a very broad question. And it really, as we look down, does the student listen respectfully, first of all, when other people speak? And this can be a skill, again, that some of our students do very naturally, and it's not an issue, and it's great when that happens. But when we see our students who are not able to listen during conversation, who tend to monopolize the conversation and not listen to others to have the give and take that is required in conversation. This is a skill that we need to practice and work on with our students. It's a very important listening skills. We also have other students, on the other hand, who just in a group situation or a small group situation, just really shut down and aren't active participants. They may be listening, but they may not be able to respond in a social way. They might not be able to evaluate the social situation and determine the appropriate use of the specific social behaviors. And again, there's a strong listening component to that skill. But they also need to be able to talk with others in a range of interesting topics without dominating the conversation. So it's a real balance. And again, as Dr. Sharon Sachs has taught us time and time again through her studies, that this is sometimes, for some students, a skill that needs to be deliberately taught. We need to be doing, working with our students, setting up scenarios, practicing with them, talking about how things are going, and paying attention to this very important area where listening plays a very big role. And then here again are the skills in the checklist that you'll see. One that I'll point out by Dr. Sharon Sachs and her book is maintains a socially appropriate conversation for a minimum of 10 minutes with peers and adults. Another is demonstrates the ability to take the role of others and understand others' feelings in various social situations. And so this is only information that you're going to glean by getting to know your students very well, to be able to talk to them about these things and pay attention. This is an important part of the expanded core curriculum that involves listening. Talking with family members if it is an issue, and having a team approach to working on some of these things. And Dr. Sachs has written a couple of wonderful books that have to do with social interaction, and listening, again, features in them. So what about our students who have additional disabilities, learning disabilities, and language disabilities? Do we have to do this on our own, or what do? We really need, this is a time for collaboration. Most often our students who have these additional disabilities have other specialists who are working with them. So teachers such as the speech language pathologist or the reading specialist and the psychologist. We want to make sure that the materials being used are appropriate for each student, and work with these specialists to suggest modification techniques if possible, and consult with a specialist when the results are being interpreted. And that's our responsibility when we're working with our students with multiple disabilities to collaborate effectively. And certainly when we see some of the issues for our students that have to do with listening, skill development, And if there are additional disabilities, we need to be working with and collaborating with these other specialists. And that's where we will end for this time around. And this is the book that was written back in 2012 that is the resource for much of this information that I shared with you today. Learning to Listen and Listening to Learn. Teaching listening skills to students with visual impairments. And thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Learning to Listen, Listening to Learn is available from AFB Press and Amazon.